big piece of work on development of capitalism in Russia. ये तो फिंगर एक कंसूल है जब उसको एग्जाम किया तो साइंस बैठ के वो ऑफिशियल रिपोर्ट लिया their version of senseless gazetteers land records.
as well. Ji, Assalamu alaikum to all our panelists. I hope you can hear me. Azam, it's good to see you. Ali Hassan, we haven't met, but I've heard a lot about you. Sajid Saab, how are you? Maha, I've heard a lot about you as well. Thank you so much for joining.
Thank you so much for having me.
Pleasure to be here. Thank you.
And I think Jamal Pizada is also on, but I can't see him on the screen. Hello, Jamal, how are you?
I'm good. Thank you very much. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much to all of you for making the time. Really, very, very grateful. And it's nice that all of you are together with us when we start this journey of trying to make data related easier. I was quite shocked when I first came to the State Bank to discover that it's so difficult to actually access data. So this is just the first step. Inshallah, isko aur bhi hum behtar karenge. So thank you so much for joining.
Should we start?
John?
Yeah. Okay. So we're on. Okay. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim and Assalamu alaikum to all the viewers. I am Abid Qamar. I am the Chief Spokesperson for State Bank of Pakistan, and I have the honor to be the host for this program today. So on behalf of State Bank of Pakistan, I welcome you all at the launching of the Easy Data, which is an interactive data portal introduced by State Bank of Pakistan. So let me just first share what is the format of this program. So we have like two parts of this program. In the first part, we will introduce you to the Easy Data portal. My colleague will give you a brief background on this, and then we will show you a video on how to use the Easy Data. That will be for the general public. And then we will request Governor State Bank, Dr. Murtaza Syed, for his keynote speech. Then in the second part, we will have a conversation with an esteemed panel of academics, researchers, and commentators. So, who have a vast experience of working with economic data, and we will learn from their experience. So these are the two parts. So let me begin with the first part. And for this, we have Dr. Ali Chaudhary, who is the research advisor and chief economist for State Bank of Pakistan. So Ali has been with State Bank of Pakistan for over a decade now, and he has several research papers based on survey data to his credit, published in top economic and financial journal. So over to you, Ali. So if you could give us a background and also tell us like why we call it the Easy Data.
Right. Okay. So we can roll. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Thank you very much for the introduction. Let me just dive quickly into Easy Data. Next slide, please. So I just want to start with how it sort of all began. It began, back in 2015. State Bank is pretty good at collecting data. So we have a network and data portals for collecting data. Once that project was over, obviously the obvious question was asked the other way around. How about making all the data available to the public at large? So that's where the idea was conceived. Now, it took about a couple of years to get the structure right. How do you actually go and implement it? And in 2019, there was a full-fledged project that was approved by the government then. And it took us about 2.5 years after 2019 to actually make it a reality. Now, one needs to understand the sort of the enormity of the task here, because you are going to make data available in perpetuity forever. So you need to make sure. So this is big data. This is truly big data. I'll show you how many data sets there are and how many data points there are in this data set, and it's growing. So you have to. First of all, it's a large undertaking. So we need to make sure that we're going to be able to do it in perpetuity. Then you have to make sure all the data compilers inside and outside State Bank of Pakistan who are collaborating in it, they're under one umbrella. You need to update it consistently. And then the slide is gone. And then the other problem with data is consistency. You have to make sure that every series that you have is consistent. And because it's a central bank, there's a certain standards that are attached to that consistency. So we need to make sure that happens as well. So that's the reason why. And then there's the history part as well. So it's just not current data. We needed to go back. Every single series need to be made consistent so that one can actually draw comparable analysis. So that was the task that the team faced. A very large team worked on. So let me just quickly show you what the past looked like. So if you currently go on our website and click on economic data, this is what it looks like. So this is, you'll see it's sort of, this web page has served us for a long time, and it's time to say goodbye to this web page. This will be running in parallel, until everything has been transferred to Easy Data. Let's move to the next slide. And the future is this. This is how clean the look is. It's got key indicators, data sets. You can put stuff in a basket. So a lot of data is available there online. You can, at a click of a button, you can download it and you can put it in a basket. This is how easy it really is. Hence, Easy Data. So let's move to the next slide. Let me just, it's a rich data set. It's standardized, historical series, and it's got cool stuff as well. Pakistan has issues with consumption data sets. So, how do you tease out consumption? Pakistan is just completely driven when you look at national income accounts. So it also provides you interesting data sets like the fast-moving consumer goods, like sales data. And we keep on adding new data sets as well. By the way, we keep constantly adding new stuff. So the demand side indicators as well. It's interactive, and it's in the other thing about this is continuous expansion. The next expansion is actually on Friday. On Friday, we are adding few more data sets, few more variables to make it even more comprehensive. So that's the highlights of why Easy Data is different from what's. I don't think anywhere outside in Pakistan you have such a large data set on Pakistan. If you move to the next slide. So this is I like this slide. So this slide has actually got 7,000 variables that we are actually using in this data set. These 7,300 variables translate into about 1.5 million data points. So this is how large this thing is. Let's move to the next slide. So we have, in terms of sectors, we have external, we have monetary, financial, real, debt. Fiscal is going to be added towards the end of the week. Interest rates, 90 different data sets. 80 plus are from State Bank, 18 outside State Bank, and and the total amount is 7,300 variables. So and it's growing. Okay, so if you just move on, the following slide. So if you so this your dashboard, the opening dashboard looks like this, and it sort of it collects all the key information in the main dashboard. But you can do all the interesting stuff as well. We'll give you a demo in a second. Let's move on. And I think that's sort of an introduction to very quick introduction to Easy Data. I hope now it's clear why it's easy.
Yeah. Thank you, Ali. Thank you. Yeah, this is easier. So it is easier, as Ali says, this is easier because we have now many of the data series available which are otherwise difficult to find out. But I think there are some other features as well. It will be much easier for you to collect your favorite data in some basket so that you can get them again and you don't have to search them again. So we will see this in the video that actually describes how to use this Easy Data portal.
Hello, I'm Talha Nadeem. If you have an interest in economic and financial sector data relating to Pakistan's economy, the SPP is providing you with a treasure trove of data through SPP Easy Data. Easy Data is a new website which gives you ready access to a wide range of data compiled by the Central Bank, the Pakistan Bureau of Statistics, and other official sources and associations. What's more, it has a user-friendly and intuitive interface which will make data access a breeze for you. So, what exactly does Easy Data provide? Well, it gives you access to over 7,000 time series variables from 90 plus datasets, covering data on monetary, external, and real sectors of the economy, as well as debt and interest rates. Not only that, more datasets will continue to be added over time. How can you navigate across its different parts, you might ask? It's very simple, as my colleague will now demonstrate for you.
Hi, I'm Hira Ghaffar. I'm going to walk you through the different parts of Easy Data. Let's begin by entering the URL easydata.spp.org.pk in a web browser. Here you can see the home page of EasyData. You can navigate across EasyData in one of the four ways. First, click on the Key Indicators tab to jump straight into a dashboard of major economic indicators such as SPP policy rate, exchange rate, and inflation. You can also click on the other tabs on this page to view sector-wise dashboards. For example, the external sector will display external indicators such as current account balance and workers' remittances. Similarly, the real sector tab shows inflation, LSM, cement sales, etc. Second, on the home page, you can click on Datasets and browse through, visualize, and download the datasets of interest to you. These datasets are neatly organized by subject areas. The frequency, source, availability, and release dates of the data are also given. Selecting a dataset will open the related data series which the dataset is composed of. You can then view the series in the form of a graph, customizing the output to your preferences, zoom in and out of the graphs using the range selector and simple drag and double-click features, and download the complete dataset or a series of your choice. The third tab on the home page, My Data Basket, allows you to create a basket of data series. This can be done after signing up for a free account. Signing up is very simple. You just have to provide your email address to create an account. For now, I'm just going to log into an account that I have already created. After logging in, you can manage several variables of interest that you have shortlisted over time and plot them on a single chart as well. The fourth way to navigate across EasyData is to use the search bar. For instance, if you want to see the data on debt, just type debt in the search bar and get the datasets and individual series pertaining to debt. Note that the home page also shows a list of recently released data and new datasets that have been added to the list, which makes it easier for you to keep track of the latest updates. If you are already familiar with the economic data section of the central bank's website, you will notice similarities between the data released there and on EasyData. We hope that the similar data layout will make your transition easier. But even if you are new to the SPP's platforms or you get stuck for any reason, the Help tab on the home page will take you to a list of frequently asked questions. Similarly, the material on the How To tab contains step-by-step guides on how you can perform basic functions like creating your own account, resetting your password, or converting the data format, and so on. If your query is still unresolved, you can always email any questions to us at easydata@spp.org.pk. That's it from my end. Back to you, Talha.
Thanks, Sarah, for that helpful walkthrough. I hope this brief introduction will help our users to get the most out of SPP EasyData. We are committed to enhance its data coverage and features over time. For now, we encourage you to dive in and explore the wealth of data available on EasyData. Goodbye.
Thank you, Akil, for playing this video. So I'm sure that the most sought after data on this EasyData portal would be the external debt data. So you know how much this, quite often this is debated in the public. So moving on. So now I'll request Dr. Murtaza Syed, Acting Governor, State Bank of Pakistan, to give some remarks about this initiative and in general, the quality and the kind of data that we have and the discussion on which basis we do.
Thank you so much, Abid Saab. And let me first begin by just thanking the panelists that are here with us in Karachi and also those that have joined us, of course, online. It really is a very, I think, a proud day for us because today I think we're doing something that when I came to the State Bank about 2.5 years ago, I spoke to Dr. Ali and I said, we have all this data, where is it? And he said, it's on the website. And I said, okay, show me where it is. I went on the website and I found a bunch of PDF documents. And I looked at Dr. Ali and I said, "Are you kidding me?" And he said, "No, this is what we have." And I said, "You do such great work, you write such papers. Is this the kind of data that you have to deal with?" And he said, "Well, no, actually internally we have something better." So I said, let's take this to the world. Why are we hiding this data like we don't actually want people to use it? And just from my experience, before of working, some of you know I used to work at the IMF before this. And IMF is a very data-driven organization. In fact, most countries now rely a lot on evidence-based, data-based research. And if you don't have the data, if people don't know where to find it, and it's hidden away in PDFs, nobody can do good work. The level of discourse in the country cannot rise. So I'm really glad. This is one of the things that I said to Dr. Ali when I first came. I want to get this right. And I had in mind the FRED database, the Federal Reserve of St. Louis. They have this very nice structure. And I think what we have been able to produce here actually has many features that are in fact better than even the FRED database. So I really hope that people will use it. People will help us to lift the level of debate in Pakistan by using actual data, by explaining to people what that data means, and by communicating better. I used to work, when I first got to know Haris, I used to work for the Google Hub in the late 1990s. That's how I started my career in Islamabad. He was a fantastic communicator. He was perhaps the most gifted communicator I've ever met. And he used to be able to convert data into stories and into statistics that made sense to people. Instead of saying, this thing costs 5 trillion rupees, which people don't really understand how much money that is, you would say this is equivalent to building 2 hospitals. This is equivalent to, educating 2 million children in 1 year. So he had a way of capturing the imagination with data as well. And I think we need to work towards that also. Not just use this data as economists, we understand it, but we also have to explain it to people. Otherwise, I think it would be missing the trick. I should also first say that this work has benefited from many years of work before even the last 2.5 years that I've been here. And I just wanted to give a shout out to a few people. Riaz Riazuddin Saab, who of course was the former Deputy Governor and Chief Economic Advisor. I believe he actually started this process. Azizullah Khatak Saab, who's now retired, used to be our Director of our Statistics Department. Moiz Muhammad, who's here, and his team, the Director of the Information Systems Department, Rahat Saeed Saab. Muhammad Asif, who's sitting here, and has actually been a linchpin of this work. Ms. Mavish Zohaib, our Statistics and Data Warehouse Department officers, Dr. Farooq Arbi in the Monetary Policy Review group, and also, of course, the external analysts who helped us during the pilot phase and they provided us a lot of good feedback on how to improve this. Now, I just want to say 2 things, and really I want to hear from our guests because I think today is really about hearing from them. I wanted to say a little bit about why we're doing this. We're doing this, first of all, as I said, because we need to modernize in Pakistan. We need to improve the debate. This is the first step in doing that. But also, I think I want people to appreciate that there's been a lot of talk around the State Bank Act. There was an amendment, a major amendment that was done earlier this year. A lot of noise around it. The State Bank has become more autonomous, independent. But at the same time, we have also become more accountable, and we need to become more transparent. And this is a first step by making the data available that we use ourselves for analysis to others as well, for them to do their own analysis using that data. I think that's going to be very helpful for us in terms of transparency and accountability. And also, I feel that, as I said, communication now is the name of the game. We've been trying to make a lot of improvements in communication in the last 2.5 years that I've been here. We do a investor call after every Monetary Policy Committee meeting. I often look, and I'm very glad when I see Khurram joining that. He's usually very quiet, doesn't ask questions, thank God, because I'm sure his questions will be very, very insightful and difficult to answer. But it's good to see people like Khurram also coming to this. So our communication we are trying to improve. And we really need everybody to help us because, unless we can all help lift the discourse, we're going to get the kind of analysis that we get at 8 o'clock and 9 o'clock and 10 o'clock on TV, which is very black and white, doesn't really talk about trade-offs, is not proper economic discourse. If you want to talk about economics, you have to talk about the complexity of economics. You can't reduce it to the kind of black and white, unfortunately, analysis that we sometimes see. So this is what it's all about. And really happy to be part of the panel and really grateful to our guests for having come. And I also want to say that hopefully in the future, this is not just a one-off. We want to open ourselves more to collaborating with academics, to collaborating with think tanks, to collaborating with universities. And we want to be seen as being a different state bank from the past.
Thank you, Gaurav Sahab. Thank you very much. Yes, indeed, with the independence and accountability that has been talked about a lot about when the State Bank Act was being passed through the Parliament. So transparency is the big thing now. And I hope that with this data portal, we will be more transparent in terms of like sharing data with the public. So, so this concludes our first part. And coming to the second part, we will have a more in-depth discussion about the data. So what I've done is I've organized it again in 3 parts. And in the first part, I'll try to cover like how much like informed or uninformed our economic discourse is in the country. So we have seen that like maybe during the last 2 decades, we have seen the electronic media that has emerged as one of the big sources of information for the general public. So people form their opinion and they form their expectations on the basis of whatever information is available to them. And one big source is electronic media. Then more recently, we have seen the digital media to flourish. And now everybody is like on social media and wherever something is out, so everyone is out with, is like to tweet something out of it. So, so just to see like how, see views of my colleagues here in the panel. So let me just first come to Khurram Hussain, who is an editor of Prophet magazine. Earlier, he used to write for Dawn, and every Thursday, actually, you know, as chief spokesperson, my job was to keep an eye on the media as well. So I was sure to see the article on Thursdays. Why? Because it was from Khurram, and if he has written something about State Bank, then I must be very careful in reading those lines. So, so ladies and gentlemen, Khurram Hussain is among the most widely recognized financial journalists in Pakistan. His well-researched articles and often pointed social media posts are closely followed by not only the policymakers and general public. So, Khurram, so let's start with you. So, is the economic debate in Pakistan fundamentally underinformed?
Well, thank you for that very generous introduction, first of all. The short answer to your question is yes, it is. But we shouldn't be surprised by that. I think the economic conversations in many countries are underinformed. And certainly they don't take place in the way that economists or technical-minded economic policymakers such as yourselves would want them to take place. You know, in the more public setting, monetary policy, interest rates, these are fairly esoteric topics. They don't touch. And I remember when I was in television, we used to do live coverage of the monetary policy, and we used to try and do a small event with it. Then we get a couple of experts and try and drive a discussion around it. And I was the one who then finally said we're going to stem this practice, because frankly speaking, nobody cares. I'm talking about the television viewing public. Those who do care and those who have stakes, they're not going to come to TV to get the insights. They will get them, you know, from the State Bank's own publications. So yes, it's underinformed and needs to improve. Let me just say a couple of things about that. There are 2 dimensions along which Pakistan's economic conversation needs to improve. One of those is data. And I'm very pleased. I've had an opportunity to play around with the Easy Data portal before coming in. And incidentally, it's a lot of fun to play with if you're using a touch screen, because you can actually pinch and contract, and the graphs actually expand, and you can see an annual graph and just pinch and expand. It's I just spent a certain amount of time just going through that. And I wish that some of the series could be extended to go beyond 2013, where they currently end. But even if you look at it from 2013 till now, and you just sort of look at the peaks and troughs and key indicators, a story begins to speak to you. I'm glad that the availability and time series is now there, because it used to be very cumbersome for us to manually accumulate all this whenever we're writing a story. One byproduct of that tedium was that we all, in my profession, became very intimately familiar with the State Bank website, having to go there 2-3 times every day. So now that it's changing, there'll be a bit of a change in our lives. And a few other data points perhaps could be added as you work to evolve and build this. For example, net international reserves. I don't know to what extent that data can be, or to what extent it's eligible for public disclosure as per a regular cycle, but it's a more meaningful metric than your gross foreign exchange reserves. A few other more meaningful metrics may be the ability to perform certain functions. If I want to look at exports as a percentage of debt service obligations, if I want to, perform a few functions that are not already there. If I want to look at exports as a percentage of GDP, that's already there for me. But if I want to do a function of my own, perhaps down the road, something can be built in to give me the option to do that as well. But it's it's exactly something that was needed, and I think it's going to enrich, or at least it will contribute to enriching our conversation. Let me emphasize that's a hope. And I think we all hope that it materializes. But let me also emphasize that data is only one dimension along which the conversation leads to. The other dimension is conceptual. Because data is a bit like, what do they call it in psychology, a Rorschach test, where you have an ink blot in front of you, various people look at that ink blot and each person sees in that ink blot what they want to see. So two people can look at the same ink blot and one will say it's a duck and another will say, no, it's an aeroplane. Data is a bit like that. People see in it whatever they want to see. What is needed is more sort of alongside data availability, is more sort of a conceptual rigor in what this data allows you to say and what it does not allow you to say. And in that, in imparting this conceptual rigor, I have long maintained that the State Bank has a very important role to play in making the data available, but then showing us that based on this data, this is what you can say. And that is through your other platforms that are also data driven, but where the conceptual part actually comes in, which is your quarterly reports, your monetary policy statement, your various products through which the State Bank puts out its analytical products about the state of the economy and the direction in which the economy is going. I know that in present company, I don't need to emphasize this, but I'm telling you outside of specialists, it's something that I need to keep emphasizing, that the economy is not captured in a snapshot. It's a moving thing. You have to look at trends. You have to look at the direction in which things are going. And that's when you actually capture the real nature of the developments taking place together. So if the conceptual clarity and the rigor required to actually properly make use of this data is there in the State Bank's own outward-facing, public-facing products, that will help impart a certain amount of discipline in the public discourse about what we can and cannot say based on the data. I have, in more than a decade of following economic developments in Pakistan, I've grown very weary of this spectacle, where a government comes in, says we inherited a broken economy, and then the same government goes out and says, while we were in power, the economy was growing, and then these guys came in and ruined it all, and now the economy is in the wrong place. This narrative, and all governments do this. We hear this cycle ad nauseum now so much. This comes out of the lack of conceptual discipline, the lack of conceptual rigor that allows people at the top to get away with putting out this narrative and escape with it every single time. If the State Bank can play its part in making high quality data available to us in an accessible form, and at the same time, through its other public facing products, teach us, or at least tell us that based on this data, this is the picture that is developing within the economy. This is what you can say, and this is what you cannot say based on this data. Then I think only when both these ingredients are there, then I think you can argue that the State Bank has done its part to help elevate the level of the economic conversation in this country.
Thank you, Karam. I think you have raised a very important point that just sharing the data is not enough. I think we need to go beyond that, and we should also, I would say, maybe we should interpret it properly so that people could get the right idea about what the data is saying. So yes, we should be doing that. Well, by the way, I can only share this is an advanced version. Like we are trying to do that with the help of we are going to introduce State Bank's podcast. So in which we will try to cover these kind of things for the general public, that what's going on in the economy in a very common man's language. And similarly, we will also be giving explainers about the various economic variables and about the data. So maybe in future, you will find this kind of information. So now let me just move on to Dr. Ali Hasnan. So thank you, Ali, for joining us. So Ali Hasnan is the associate professor and the head of economic departments at LUMS. We are delighted to have him here as a panelist, as Ali has also been very vocal about the need to have a fact-based discussion on economy and the need to take a tough economic decisions. I hope, Ali, you will be happy about looking at some of the tough economic decisions made by the government now. So my question to you is that what is the missing ingredient that has made such discussions elusive in our country? Do you think that we should interpret the data as Kono was suggesting, and also interpreting the data on social media like Twitter? Should we do that?
Okay, so let me start with the first question, which is what's made fact-based discussions elusive in Pakistan? And I think for me, the first thing is that there's been a lack of data due to both a lack of effort in creating the type of initiative that you're starting today, and that's been historically missing, but also because of political reasons. So my favorite example of that is the fact that Sindh and Punjab can often not agree on how much water is flowing at the border between the two provinces. That's a problem that has no technical problem in solving, but it's a political problem. So both because of a lack of effort and because of politics, data has been missing in Pakistan. We've had the Right to Information Act in 2 provinces, but it's been very patchy in its administration, and so it's very hard to find data when we want it. The second part of that is that there's been a lack of effort put into using the data. And for this, I blame the fact that we have a relative void in policy-focused institutions in the country. So if you think about the community of applied economists in Pakistan, it's quite small, and they don't have a place to work that's consistently there, allowing them to flourish. And so part of that then ties into the fact that most analysts in Pakistan stay tied up in trying to put together very basic data, because it's not been easy to access so far. Last month I was looking at trying to understand the size of the fuel subsidy relative to other costs, and this is something that really should be done at an administrative level. It should be something that is communicated politically at the time of making that policy decision. But either because of a lack of effort in cohering that data, or because it's not politically expedient, those type of comparisons are not made. And so we enter into conversation. And so the general public will often say, economics is really confusing or intimidating. And it is because we haven't made the effort in lowering the barrier to understanding. So it's fantastic that we're now talking about at least having a place where we can bring data sets together for the citizenry to access easily. There's an American politician who once said that you're entitled to your opinion, but you aren't entitled to your own facts. And that's extremely important for us to get sorted. As a researcher, when I'm looking at data, I need to think, the effort in data collection is often a public good. Most of the data I collect can be used by other researchers down the line. And what we lack also in the academic world is a venue where we can collect and maintain those data sets. My hope is that in your initiative, the institution will continue to own this over time, because I've been involved in data sets that have required updating over time. and sometimes the consistency of that updating doesn't happen. State Bank has an excellent record for this, but this is something that's begun anew, and I hope that that effort will be made. And let me end by saying I don't, talking about whether we should have those conversations on Twitter or not. That for me is really an ephemeral conversation. It's, Twitter is 15 years old. It might not be here tomorrow. We might have other ways to converse. And in fact, the one that I think we as economists need to really engage with is TikTok. The mass, the broad masses are all on TikTok. They're all, they need to have the basics of the economy conveyed to them in their language, in their style, and in ways that they can then start to engage with and start becoming more political in their engagement with society. Let me end with a quote from Abraham Lincoln. Lincoln, of course, not only was sort of one of the most influential presidents of the US, but also a newspaper owner. So he lived both lives. He said, "He who molds public sentiments goes deeper than he who enacts statutes or makes decisions, pronounces decisions." And I think there for us is a great sort of direction for us to take, which is this effort has to become about molding public sentiments towards a healthier economy. Thank you.
Thank you, Ali. Thank you very much for an interesting thought. Like you're suggesting that maybe central banks should be preparing themselves for the TikTok as well. So I think this is an interesting thought. So maybe a couple of years back, nobody would even think of going to the TikTok, but now there are many people talking about this forum as well. So I personally agree on that. So now let me just involve Dr. Ahmed Pirzada, who is the lecturer in economics at University of Bristol. So he also regularly drops factual tweets and papers to share his views on the general state of availability of economic data in Pakistan. So Dr. Ahmed, so in your view, what more we at the State Bank can do specifically to improve this situation? Do you think that SBP should interpret data for the public, as Forum was suggesting and as Ali said?
Hi, thank you. So first of all, thank you for having me here. I think, so coming to your question, I think it's this launch is already quite an important step in the right direction. So if you want to do economic analysis in Pakistan, you have to be an expert in two things. One, a bit of economics, and two, how to find data. So I think this will probably resolve the second aspect of it. Before I sort of say a few more things, let me influence the future iterations of the portal a bit more. So there's one thing which I really like and which I want you guys to keep it like that in the future. That's the data set part. So when I was playing with it, I wasn't really sure what I'm going to find. I went to the data set section. You can open the whole data set, and then you have the option to plot individual series right there, right then. And that's really useful for me who wants to have a whole macro picture by looking at the whole balance of payment scenario, let's say the whole data set, and then also having this freedom to plot whichever series I want to plot in there. So I hope that stays, because this is something which I haven't seen in Fed. I can't think of any other website on top of my mind which actually allows for this freedom to see the whole picture and also plot individual series. So I hope that stays in future iterations as well. So in the process of playing around with the data which is up there, there were a few things which I thought might be useful. One is there's this option of period on period conversion, but I think it will be even more useful to have an option for year on year conversion. The reason being seasonality. So many of the high frequency data out there, just looking at the seas doesn't really give you much of information unless you can actually see do some kind of conversion. So that will be useful. The second thing is to do with what Khurram was also pointing out. Maybe in the future iterations, if we can actually, if the portal can allow for some very basic elementary operations like creating a ratio or summing two series and then sort of seeing for yourself what that basically tells you, that can be super useful. I think that's something which Fred allows in their current website. Also in the future, like Ali was pointing out, it will be very, very important for the state bank to have dedicated resources that make sure that the data remains up to date. There's a lot more data now on the portal than what you already have on the economic data on the old website. Many of the data which you currently have is actually monthly, in some cases, even let's say weekly or every 2 weeks, because let's say the auction data. And it's very important for there to be dedicated resources which continue to update that for the user to keep coming back and seeing what's happening in the economy. I think coming to your second question, I think that's really interesting, how the state bank should interpret the data. I'll want to take it from a very different perspective, which is more from the development of the staff at the SPP. I'm sure on day-to-day basis, SPP staff engages in all sorts of excellent analysis, which doesn't really end up anywhere because it is meant to serve a purpose right then, right there, and that's pretty much it. So I think keeping that in mind, also keeping the aspect of interpreting these data series and so on, one way you can go about is basically having a blog section on your portal, not as a separate platform, where you allow your staff members to post their day-to-day analysis, which they want to share with the public, onto the blog post, and then also link it with the data series which are available on the portal. So I think this sort of will help some kind of development or discourse within the bank itself. And then it will also help the user to see what the state bank staff is thinking with respect to these different data series which are available out there. And you should tag them together. So let's say if I'm the user, I go to the data set, I open the series for, let's say, public data. I scroll down, I can see the data and everything, obviously, which is available as of now as well. But if I scroll down, I can also see some of the blog posts which have been written in that context. And if I want to dig deeper, I can just open one of those posts and read a bit more. Obviously, you should have your usual disclaimer that these are the views of the staff members, not those of the bank, because that can create all kinds of problems. If, let's say, someone doesn't agree with what the user is saying, and that also allows a bit more freedom to the user, to the staff member, to say whatever they want to say. And this, I think this is something which is already there on Fred. Bank of England has it in a different kind of a format. They don't link it with the data set. They actually have it as a blog website, a bank underground separately. But I think combining it with the data set, that will be much more useful both for the development of the staff members within the bank, and for them to have a platform where they can actually showcase their thoughts. And also for the users like me or the general public to actually interact with the data, but also read on the deeper conversations on a particular data series right there. So let me stop there. Thank you once again. I mean, congratulations. So it's safe for me to say I'm gonna say goodbye to one of the most crappiest folder on my laptop from this point onwards.
Thank you, Ahmed. Thank you very much. Thanks for all the suggestions that will help us to improve the Easy Data portal. I'm sure that my colleagues would have noted those suggestions. And also thanks for bringing the other suggestion, which is to create a forum for our staff, where they could give their own analysis or interpretations of the data. So I'll be happy to share here that we are also working on that. And soon we'll be launching a blog where you will be able to hear or read from our colleagues, pieces written by our colleagues. So I hope that soon we will be launching that as well, and we'll invite you again, once again for that. Okay, so let me just now move to Dr. Azam Chaudhry, who is the Professor of Economics and the Dean of Faculty of Economics and Pro-Rector of the Lahore School of Economics. So, Dr. Sahab, so on a daily basis, you know, we all, a majority of our population is glued to the televisions and listening to the 8 o'clock TV shows, talk shows. And in that, we hear, of course, a lot of information that we get. And quite often people also say that most of the time we hear hearsay, right? So I don't want to say that, because my colleagues from the media fraternity, they will be angry with me because I have to deal with them on a day-to-day basis. But that is something I can say that people say, right? So what, in your opinion, how can economists and even SBP fight this tendency, or should they stay away from this void altogether and focus long-term research only?
Thank you very much. First, let me take this opportunity to congratulate the State Bank, congratulate the governor, and of course his predecessor, Dr. Raza Bhatia, and going all the way back to Dr. Ishrat Hussain. I was just looking at the new website and I felt really old because I think I've been using that old website for years. And then when Ali was talking about TikTok, I was like, man, I mean, I'm just trying to get a handle on Twitter. So I was feeling quite old. Just to tell you a few things. One is, I was thinking about the question, and the idea is that, look, my mother is glued to the TV and my family are watching these shows and all this excitement. And I was thinking to myself, look, a lot of it is sensationalized news. But the fact of the matter is that is how the public forms their opinion. So it's really important to be able to at least, first of all, understand that. The public is worried about inflation. The public is worried about jobs and economic growth and poverty, etc. And a lot of the information they're getting is from these news shows. And now, responding to it in a timely manner is very difficult. I had a colleague of mine who worked for DFID, and, they would get a call at 8:59 saying, we're going to go with this great story, a sensational story. Can you respond in 1 minute? And it's tough to respond in real time. But I think it is important to engage with the media and to actually come, talk to them in the same language. Some of the data they're quoting is obviously wrong. Obviously, one government says this and another government says that about balance of payments or the amount spent on fuel subsidies. Some of it is wrong, and maybe the State Bank doesn't have to just contradict every wrong piece of information. But the second thing is information about inflation, information about balance of payments, current account, remittances. This is something that's important to the common man of Pakistan. And I think it's really important to be engaged with the common man through the press, which is the primary way people get information. Now, going one step further, actually, the media actually shapes expectations. And as we know, one of the most important drivers of a lot of the economic, volatility we see are expectations. If someone comes on TV and says the economy is about to collapse and, balance of payments is unsustainable and we're going to default tomorrow on all our foreign debt, what's going to happen to the rupee the next day? What is going to happen to, other prices? So, so I think managing or at least dealing with a lot of these sensational stories can actually at least reduce some of the, dramatic changes in expectations and also potentially reduce volatility, which could in next step could also affect investment. Right? I think, people's investment decisions could be a common business person, could be a large multinational, could be a hedge fund or a foreign fund wanting to invest in Pakistan. They are going to be also affected by, what are their expectations and what is the volatility. So I think this is a huge step. Availability of data is, in my mind, one of the ways we can actually manage expectations. And next step forward, I think, not only does better data help, manage expectations, it also, we hope, leads to better policy. One step is, I think the State Bank of Pakistan, in my mind, and I'm not saying this because the State Bank representatives and the governor and our colleague and friend Ali Chaudhry is perhaps one of the most credible organizations in Pakistan in terms of actual economic data. I think people trust it. I think there is a lot of controversy about the State Bank Act and accountability, but I don't think anyone can debate the fact that the State Bank is trusted in what it says is accurate, right? And I think, this availability of data should lead to better policies and hopefully more reform, and we hope to more long-run growth, right? I think, I think investment, stability, better institutions all lead to long-run growth. In terms of, I was looking at the portal, I was really excited. I was looking, and it's fun because I was looking at not just current account, but I think there's these bogeymen in the Pakistan economy, like imported cheese, that, the whole economy of Pakistan is about to collapse because of this current account crisis, which is imported cheese. So I look at it because my daughter sometimes has cheese, so now she's having more domestic cheese. And it's important to see what are these commodities, what are we importing, what are we exporting? One of the things I was interested in, I didn't catch it, it might be theirs, one of the big things people are debating is obviously current account, massive current account deficit because of a large import of fuel, right? It'd be interesting to see not only what is the dollar amount of fuel we're importing on a monthly basis or a long term, but what is the quantity, right? Because you can then, economists can start separating out, okay, we've been, 100, if there's X amount increase in our fuel bill, 70% of it may be due to higher international prices, 30% may be because we're importing more because our maybe overheating. Interesting to know quantities or capital inflows. When we're looking at firms, there's this huge debate that, okay, growth is coming right around the corner because all these textile manufacturers or exporters are importing high quality capital. It'd be interesting to see, what is the sort of capital, and maybe you can try to figure out in terms of actual, value per unit, right, of capital. Some of the things I was thinking about, right, is, in terms of, how this data could be used. One is, it'd be interesting. I think my colleague who was introducing the website discussed, that, putting in your email address is useful. One thing the State Bank may want to do is, I think really, I'm sure you're going to be doing it, is tracking usage of the website, obviously, 10,000, 20,000 users, but also tracking which actual data sets are accessed. I'd be really interested to know, is it the imports? Is it the current account? Is it exports? What are people looking at? And maybe even adding in one field, like, maybe an optional field, like, are you associated with an organization or educational institution, to just see who are the people who are actually accessing this data. It'd be interesting to see. Maybe a lot of people won't give it, but it'd be fun to see. The next thing is, and my colleague Ali and a lot of my colleagues online do a lot of interesting research. It'd be really interesting to see how this availability of data actually affects expectations, right? I think, in the dream world, we've been doing a lot of these randomized controlled trials or experiments, and you release the data in a phased way. But it'd be just interesting to try to figure out ways of how expectations about, exchange rates or expectations about inflation or even economic growth are affected by this availability of new data, right? Going one step further, it'd be interesting to see in terms of the State Bank's own work, how, this data plays a role in the State Bank model. I think a lot of us are really interesting. We have our own model at the Law School of Economics. I know a lot of institutions have a macro model, and I always wonder how that model works. I always picture it that it's like, one of those James Bond movies where, a lot of lights are flashing and red. And I'm like, oh my goodness, I don't know how the State Bank seems so calm, but it'd be interesting to see how this data feeds into this, into your model, and maybe shares some of the results of that model. And then also see, this data, how it feeds into what other macro modelers are doing. I know the State Bank collects data on, what's going on, what are expectations about inflation or growth, but it'd be interesting to do a survey of forecasters and see, how does the data the State Bank is now releasing, or, macro data play a role in their forecasts, and what is the general forecast or a quarterly basis of various forecasters. Also, and the last thing I was going to say is, I'm not sure this data is large enough, but I think the State Bank should really take the lead in terms of it's doing some amazing work. This data is great in terms of machine learning and, using some of these large data sets, right? I think, the law school, we started over the last year collecting data on prices of goods, 100,000 commodities online, on a daily basis. So we already have a few billion observations and trying to figure out, price stickiness, etc. I'm not sure this data is large enough yet, but it may be to do some interesting things in terms of big data analysis and machine learning, right? But again, I think I'll stop here, but I do want to congratulate the State Bank, right? And again, going back to your original question, I think it is important, right? I think it's because the press feeds into opinions and it feeds into what the common man thinks, and engaging with the press and engaging on them on a lot of these issues is really important. But thank you for the opportunity to join you, and congratulations again.
Thank you, Dr. Azam. You're spot on when you say that if you wish to anchor expectations, then traditional media is the media that we should be using through press or through television. So let me just move on to the second strand of our topic, which we wanted to discuss. Research begins with availability of data. So how good as a country we are at this? For this, first I would like to invite Dr. Adil Malik, who is the Globe Fellow in the Economies of Muslim Societies and Associate Professor in Development Economics at the University of Oxford. So Dr. Adil, my question to you is that based on your extensive work on developing economies, can you identify for our audience some of the common data-related challenges that you have come across? And to what extent do you think that the launch of the Easy Data portal would address those challenges as far as economic data for Pakistan is concerned? Over to you, Dr. Adil. Sorry, we can't hear you, Dr. Lee.
Sure. Thank you very much for inviting me to this important event. I think this is a challenge that we all economists, especially those who work on developing countries, in particular face. And I think there's the issue about data is has many layers to it. So one relates to the role of methodology. A lot of the modern methods in economics require data that has at least two features. One, that it's spatially fine-grained, right? So if you're looking at household level data, or there is spatial granularity in it, if you're publishing data across Pakistan, you cover different regions. And then over time, in the sense that you could map similar units over time. So, just to give you a sense on poverty, literally every study that you think on poverty is based on the data set that was compiled way back in time by Dr. Sohail for IFPRI. And there were just a few villages and a few districts for which there was data compiled for the same individuals over time. So the ability for us to track same units, whether it's firms or it's individuals or it's other important economic units over time, really gives you the power. And it's that granularity which is also very important. So that I think that's the first aspect. Second is data access is linked with hierarchy. A lot of developed countries researchers who are privileged enough to be in developed countries in top universities are able to get access to pricey data through their contacts, right? And local researchers rarely have the sort of access that is needed. And that creates huge issues in terms of access. In many countries, such as Pakistan, which is a growing middle class, have the higher education system is expanded in ways that there is at least greater demand for MSc, MPhil students to do dissertations, and they're always looking around for good data sets, and they don't have access to it. I think that, again, is something very useful to create this long-term partnership with universities, especially on issues where the state bank really wants to collate more information, and on issues where you require that sort of fine-grained data. That partnership could be very useful. So I think the issue of hierarchy in terms of data is extremely important, and the state bank can play an important role. The third thing, which is very important, which I think Azam Saab has already referred to, is that a lot of our economic debate is quite vacuous. The media, especially electronic media, is really lagging behind in the coverage of economic issues. Over the last 4 or 5 years, I've seen that the nation as a whole is ready to debate economic issues, but the electronic and print media is not there yet. People want to know, why do we need to, why we need to increase oil prices, what is the role of subsidies, how can we create jobs? There's immense appetite for it. And I think the state bank can play a hugely important role in that. And finally, I think where we are moving, you need integrated data platforms, right? So the state bank might provide information on prices, on the type of credit that is being dispersed, on other related macro features. But then you might need some information from NADRA, or you might need some information from the tax authorities. I think, Murtaza, one issue that the state bank can really play an important role is to partner with other institutions to create an integrated data platform for researchers. That also would be very useful. Now, the final sort of more personalized comment that I will give from my own research. I did a paper on religious shrines, and I discovered that very basic data set, like how much do we spend on schools at the primary level? How much of it is salary expense? How much of it is non-salary expense? over time, we don't have that data set, right? How much money is dispersed to constituencies in terms of development spending? So a very basic stat is, constituency NA40, how much development spending is allocated for it, and how much is spent on health, education, roads, right? Some disaggregate data. We don't have that data set. Imagine if we had that data that would allow us to map patterns of development spending across national and political provincial assemblies from the 2000s up till now. That would be a terrific thing, right? I think those very basic data sets, I'm doing a paper on trade, and again, we don't have import demand elasticities. I mean, you cannot do very simple trade work without knowing, what our import demand elasticities are. And in fact, also the debate about whether to ban cheese or not. We do not have information on ad valorem equivalence of non-tariff measures, right? This is very, very basic stuff. Census of manufacturing industries. We don't have regular data. I mean, this country, by the way, is suffering from a decline in long-term, large-scale manufacturing, right? We've been bemoaning this issue for the last 10 years. It should bow our heads in shame that we do not have census of manufacturing industry data that goes far back in time. This was just a recent release that we had, but it should be every year. Why don't we have census of manufacturing industries every year? And where we can track how much firms are producing, what is their value added, what is their cost structure, how much of their content is imported. I mean, you cannot make policy, without that basic data. And we're a country of 220 million people. We need to create jobs. Our manufacturing sector is declining. We need data. So that's the level of shortage when it comes to collecting data and then sharing data. Similarly, you have the Benazir Income Support Program data. Why is that data not made public to ordinary researchers? And I think here it's not just the government, it is also the donors who are part of the problem, right? If I am the DFID or if I'm the World Bank working with the Punjab government for 20, 30 years in a lot of these different project implementation units, why is there not enough data, especially on political economy aspects, is not being generated? So I think there's a lot that could be done. But in terms of access, we need to think about hierarchy, make it accessible to local researchers. We should make data available at a higher level of granularity, going down to firms, regions, spatial granularity, and hopefully also compile data over time. And I think this would require a continuous feedback, because what I demand as a researcher is not what somebody at the State Bank or in the planning ministry would be thinking about. Sometimes, they compile their data and they put it on PDF files rather than on Excel files, so they could be downloaded. And also the point about integration. Azam mentioned this point about machine learning, but I think another important aspect is the sort of GIS shape files. We need shape files. That's not perhaps state banks tasked to do it, but all these public institutions can create. I went to the Election Commission of Pakistan and asked them for electoral shape files, and I was amazed. They said we compiled electoral shape files, but we have in PDF form. They didn't keep it. They didn't keep the shape files in the way they are, so that researchers can download them. So all in all, I think this is great effort that we are, it's the first time probably that I've been invited to talk to senior state bank officials, and I really appreciate this initiative. I think this interaction, this continuous interaction between the research community, who are the end users of the data, others like Khurram Hussain Saab, who cover these issues in the media, and state bank officials, is a very, very good step, and I think it should continue. There should be a continuous learning and feedback from all of these communities, so that we could create a productive space for debate. Anyway, I've already taken a lot of my time. Sorry, I was examining a PhD viva, so I was late for today's meeting.
Thank you, Dr. Adil, for your thoughtful analysis and views on data. Indeed, we have a long way to go, but we have just started the journey. So maybe in future you will see that there's more progress related to data. So coming to, on the same thing, coming to Dr. Asma Haider, who's the Dean of the School of Economics and Social Sciences at IBA Karachi. So Dr. Asma, so let me ask you, what kind of challenges do you and your fellow faculty members and students come across when it comes to locating and accessing economic data relevant to Pakistan? And the second part is, and what would the availability of an innovative and accessible portal like Easy Data do in helping you and your colleagues and students overcome these challenges?
So thank you for the question, and congratulations to the State Bank team for successful launch of this portal, which was definitely the need of time. So as far as the academia is concerned, we are always struggling with the data because it's available at different places, and usually what we do that we use the IMF sources, the International Financial Statistics. So the issue with the international financial statistics is basically because they get the data definitely from Pakistani different sources, but that which is fragmented. And usually what happens that in one series, there are so many missing values, and then they use the different base years. So Dr. Ali already mentioned that they have considered that it's important for consistency. So if the same base year is important, if we are looking into the one-time series, or maybe the different variables as well. So I think this is something that is going to help the academia, the faculty, the students while analyzing these type of variables. The other thing is that basically, I think I will build on what Dr. Adil said, that for instance, the firm level data, I'm not sure that how much, if there is any conflict of interest, I'm sure there is not, but if, for instance, if this joint hand with for instance, the stock exchange data, they have, for instance, the Karachi Stock Exchange, they have 550 firms. So if there is any possibility of having the firm to report the firm level data, so I think it's going to help a lot. And similarly, so there are many more macroeconomic variables. So yesterday when Dr. Ali shared the link, I browsed, but definitely I couldn't look into detail. But one of the realization is, as Dr. Ali already mentioned, that so macroeconomic variables, they are usually available on the State Bank, but when we look into the fiscal side, we have to go to the FPR website or maybe the Ministry of Finance. So if all of them are available on one data portal, it's going to help our life easier. And especially when we are talking about the macroeconomic growth, so I think it's going to help the debate for journalists as well, and for other think tanks also, that because whenever we are talking about the macroeconomic, so we need to think about that how the monetary policy and fiscal policy complement each other, and whether they are in the same direction or not, and we can raise questions maybe on the State Bank or on the government as an independent think tank or universities. So this is one thing that, and similarly, if for instance, the data on the revenues, as I already mentioned, that the tax from the tax and non-tax revenues, and also as Dr. Deel said, that on the development side as well. So I think that's going to help and enrich the debate. So these are some of the things which probably maybe you can build the capacity. And similarly, the Federal Bureau of Statistics, they actually opened some of their data sets which are available especially the micro data sets which are available online, which was not available earlier. So that is a good initiative. But I think if all of them are available on one national portal, it's going to be really, really helpful. So that the citizen, so it's not only important for academia, but also important for the citizen. For instance, whenever the State Bank is talking about the monetary policy, but how it's going to affect the households. So this is very important. And only we can look into these variables if we have the household consumption data, or the consumption pattern. So this is another idea, that if we can synchronize all those data at one place, because all of them are the different government bodies. So these are some of the points. And one more thing that I would say that I can't stop myself not to mention, that is basically maybe Harris will further elaborate on that it's important to strengthen the democracy. So I think that it's very important to have debate on the different policies, on different patterns, and how it's going to affect. So it for informed citizen to strengthen the ballot boxes and for informed politics. That's very important. So I'm sure that this portal is going to help to improve the national debate and also to academia as well.
Thank you, Dr. Esma, for your views. Indeed, yes, you're right. Having all the data in one place could be a wish for all of us. So Dr. Ali, your easy data portal is not easiest still, so you have to make it even easier, right?
It's not easy, but it's not comprehensive.
Yeah, you're right. So we have with us Maha Rahman as well, who is the data analytics specialist. She has many years of experience in designing and executing evidence-based programs to improve service delivery and impact. So my question to Maha is, what kind of challenges you have come across in accessing relevant economic and financial data for Pakistan? What is the state of experimental economics in Pakistan, which requires first-hand data collection?
I would first of all, like to thank State Bank for this invitation, because this is a topic that I'm really, really passionate about. Having set up the data analytics cell at SERB and engaged with State Bank in the past in various capacities with your data analysis team, with Dr. Ali Chaudhary. And so one thing that I would first want to start with, and my colleagues here have pointed out fantastic things of what all do we need to do. There's a lot that we need to do, but there is, in the last 2 to 4 years, the scenario has also really changed. The landscape has also really developed, especially during COVID. So I would want to start off by pointing a few positives. So during COVID, given how bad our data systems were, we could not figure out what hospitals had capacity where. The demand for good data from both the federal and the provincial governments has increased. And what that has done is that has pushed the institutions to get their data systems in shape, to get their data, to bring their data systems in a format that is usable and shareable. So I've worked extensively with the federal and the provincial government in the last 3 years. And so that has been a huge positive for me, where the commissioners and the bureaucrats, they demand data and they want to learn how to consume data and how to deploy it. So that demand, I think, is putting good pressure on the data sources for them to be brought up in a format that's usable. So having said that, I would want to quote an incident here. I was recently leading a training with officials from State Bank, finance departments from the different secretaries were there, there were officials from the federal government, planning development, and they all erupted into a debate over how one department was very protective of their data and would not share their data with another department. So we are talking about integrating the data systems, and we're talking about bringing all those data sources together. But for that integration to happen, we need to be less territorial. Every department needs to be less territorial about the data. That's the first thing. Every department will need data from other departments. And so sharing across departments is critical. And second, for the data systems to be aggregated on one platform, they need to speak to one another. Right now, the data from State Bank will not speak to the data from PBS, will not speak to the data from the Trade Ministry. And even when you're looking at micro data sets on education, on health, the statistics, every survey is going to report on enrollment is different. The statistics that on basic indicators are different. So you need to integrate them in a way that there is consistency across data sets. So when researchers are coming into a country, what data set or what institution should they look at? Increase the integrability, increase the accuracy so that the data sets are more usable. Having said that, I think the portal is a very fresh change. I really enjoyed going over the portal. It has made the beauty of the visualization is that they're simple. So the simpler you keep the visualization, the simpler you keep the analysis, the more effective it is. And right now, a lot of the users were going to the World Bank website, to the IMF website to get those visualizations, to get that data. that traffic is now going to be diverted to the state bank website, that we can shape our own narrative on our own economy ourselves. Having said that, I feel the data sets right now are just reporting one variable per data set. They need to be consolidated, more variables in each data set, so that they're more readily and easily analyzable. That's the second thing. Moving on, I think increasing the integrability, increasing the consolidation, you also need to make the methodology of collecting this data and bringing this data public. How was this data collected? Where does this number come from? And related to that is the idea of the level of aggregation. So our trade data is there. We are saying we are exporting X, Y, and Z to X, Y, and Z country. That needs to be, most of the countries have that at the firm level. So go down to as much detail as you can. That's going to be a progressive step. We can't demand everything of one platform in one go. So that's the next step, that increase. It needs to be available at the right level of aggregation. So I'll give you an example. A lot of South Asian countries are now looking at figures for poverty and for migration in a seasonal way. So poverty is seasonal in a lot of areas. Migration is seasonal. We don't have that data. No institution in the country generates the required information to calculate that at a seasonal level. And so once countries are looking at that at a different time frame and at a different framework, we need to keep pace with how the literature is changing in South Asia, in Sub-Saharan Africa, and generate the same amount of information. I feel, I'm going to defer with the panel a bit. I feel State Bank is one institution that already has a lot of capacity to quickly clean and analyze, generate data to produce consumable insights. We need to build on that. And State Bank by far right now is the most equipped institution in the country to do that. But there's a lot more that we need to do. With that, putting the data out, putting insights out, this democratization of data also has cons. Everyone is going to interpret that in different ways. Data is fairly political. While it is, a lot of people will say it's factual, it's fairly political. So while we are putting data out, we also need to contextualize. What was the context in which this was collected? What was the background to it? And so that we can create the right narratives of that data. Moving on to the part of experimental economics, I feel as long as once you get the permissions to run your own experiments, mini experiments in different countries, the hurdle that you run into is that administrative data sets are not available in a usable format. So that is one thing that we as a country need to address, perhaps not State Bank. I'll give you an example. So we were working on vaccines in Lahore and collected LESCO addresses from LESCO and different utility companies to reach out to the households or the areas where the vaccination rate was low. But those addresses cannot be mapped onto the UC data because the UC boundaries have not been released by the urban unit. And the urban unit is bound by the federation to not release that data. So there are serious, there are laws around what data can be released and what data cannot be released. And so once we are starting the debate on what data to put forth, those are laws, regulations that we need to look into. And I think there's a lot of sharing within departments is going to open up a lot of sources and make the analysis much richer. So Dr. Azam and Dr. Adil have put forth really good, so that's basically covered what else I wanted to say. But in the end, I wanted to commend State Bank on taking this step on putting up a portal that's very nice to work around with. I'm usually not a fan of data portals, but this one is one product that has been put out that will benefit many researchers and that will benefit many practitioners out there. It's developed really well. The backend development looks great. Visualizations are simple and insightful. Data sets are easily downloadable. And so I think this is a huge step forward in what other institutions should be emulating and taking forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Maha, for your views. Indeed, for consistent sets of data, we need more coordination among the organizations. So let's move on to the third perspective with which we can look at the data, and that is from a social lens, right? So I'll move to Haris Darsa, who's the director and senior researcher at the CSSR and an independent academic and policy research organization. So Haris, so data is important, we know that. But are people in Pakistan looking for actual data, or they just are interested in confirming their biases through selective data gathering?
I think that people, so there's a lot of information. So I want to actually talk a little bit about the difference between information and data. And I think a lot of the colleagues in this discussion have already pointed out to the political nature of the exercise. So let me actually try to answer your question using that framework. People use information for a whole range of things, and it's not just about opinions. So people use information about their economic decisions, and they need to sift information and to use information which they think is authentic and is going to be beneficial to them. So human beings, societies and collectives have a way of sifting information and basically creating value around information which they think is authentic and will gain some benefit. Alongside that, we have a whole history in human civilization of how people interact with each other and how they interact with authority. And that's when you talk about political systems, and that's when opinions become important. Right? So a lot of the discussion we've had so far, a lot of our concerns as specialists or commentators about what goes on in the media, it's really about our disaffection with how information and data are used in public debates. Right? So that's a separate aspect of data. Now, all societies create information, and all societies create boundaries about which information can be used legitimately for debate and discussion. And as we move towards more democratic societies, and that's where I want to go, I think there are three very important connections between democratization and the uses of data, the development of data. So as we go towards democratization, the first step is we go towards open societies, relatively open societies, where more and more areas of public policy can be discussed, more and more sources of information can become available, and more data points become acceptable. So there is that very nice relationship historically between democracy and data. And in some ways, what you're doing now with the State Bank is you're actually part of a broader process, I think, of democratization in Pakistan, which will go through its ebbs and flows. It's a long historical process. So in some ways, I see it both as a data user, as a social scientist, and somebody who now engages a lot with policy. I see that as a longer historical process in which these things will happen. I think that the point that Dr. Adil made about access, about hierarchy, I think that's very, very important and interesting. The second important issue is, and where I want to really congratulate your team and as an organization, the effort that has gone into it. And as I've started working more and more on policy, I understand that I appreciate this idea more, is that for information to become data, there is a process of authentication. Right? So you're basically putting the authority of an institution on data. So I can't take that lightly. The fact that you have 7,000 variables, yes, that's impressive. The fact that you have gone through it and you have created a system to basically put the State Bank badge on that is really impressive. It's basically, it takes a lot of effort, a lot of responsibility to say that, okay, now these data have our name on it. So I think that the authority of data is really, and when we talk about authority, that starts differentiating between information and what we call data. So, of course, all information is data, but in the present context of publicly available data, publicly used data, data to be used in public debates, So we're saying that things which are going to be authentic and things which are going to be authoritatively kind of sanctioned as being authentic. So once there is authority established around it, it's very important. The big drawbacks of authority, any authority, are that we use data in a particular way, but authority also creates openings for the abuse of data. And if we veer towards the abuse of data, we basically then go into this area of creating cynicism about something of value. If you look at how data have been created, authenticated, made authoritative, and then used in the entire kind of history of political development, it's very interesting that a lot of people who came up with subversive ideas of that time, who were considered to be revolutionaries and who were going to overturn the system, were using data which was produced by the system itself. So if you look at the debate that basically provided an economic backbone to the argument for decolonization in India and other parts of the world, it's based on official data that showed that there was a drain from the colonies to the metropolitan capitals. So it was official data. And time and again, that's what you see. So you have authentication of data, you have authority being given to data, and then that authority itself, in the messy process of democracy, can be undermined. But there are internal processes which can also undermine the authority. And that's when you have abuse of it. So an important example, if we talk about today's society, where post-news society, the idea of fake news, the idea that you can say anything you want and then you cannot be challenged on its authenticity. A lot of it comes from having gone through a period, particularly in the big countries, the big economies, countries which were supposed to be open societies, where data were being abused for very specific and narrow political purposes. Right? So that's something that we have to be careful about. The third important connection between data and democracy, I think that they're both very delicate creatures. If you talk about data not just as points of information, but about authoritative information, which is also not seen to be legitimate. So you can create data, you can put a badge of authority on it, but if it is not seen as legitimate, it is of no use at all. So, for example, if the state bank, if there is a movement outside the state bank, that the state bank is fudging data for a particular policy or political purpose, all of the authority of the state bank will not be sufficient to buy back that legitimacy until we can create arguments for that legitimacy. So, where both democracy and data development are kind of fragile plants, which any healthy society requires to be nourished, an important parallel is that the quality of data and their legitimacy are established through critiquing them, through critical use of data, and to rigorously critique the methods through which data were collected and to rigorously critique their interpretation. So that rigor of critique actually adds to the authenticity of the data and its legitimacy. So it's very interesting. And in the same way, the rigor of debate in a democracy, it establishes the credentials and strength of a democracy. But critique, there can be a very kind of a thin line between critique and cynicism. And very often, the stuff that actually disturbs me the most in the post-fact society, in what we see on our screens, is that that line is often crossed through verbal nuance. That people can take a view that starts from a critique of data, or in parallel, a critique of democratic outcomes, and then lead into cynical interpretations about both data on one side and about democratic outcomes on the other. So how do we guard that line between the value of critique? Because if you don't have critique, if people don't use the data, and if they don't use it critically, it's dead. It's of no use at all. But if critique crosses that line into cynicism, then you're gone too. So how do we basically, how do we guard that line? And I think that's where all of us are responsible, all of the people in this panel, all of the people who are potential users of this data are responsible. And I think that's constructive engagement. And that will happen when we are convinced that the processes through which data were collected, the way they were published, there is transparency in those. When we are convinced that it is part of an ongoing movement in society, when more and more issues in public debate, more and more issues of public interest can be debated openly and can be debated openly using data. So I think that it's a constant movement towards greater democratization, greater openness, and to be convinced that you have to make that argument, that we can't stop. And the other is that we have to constantly argue that these data were transparently collected, they were transparently published. I want to make a final point about another issue that as researchers we often come across, and it is like an issue of irritation for us, and that's how accessible data generally are. And I think that a critical thing, there's a genuine issue here. And that genuine issue really relates to how open and democratic societies will also guard the privacy of citizens. So I think we need to have a genuine debate about that. So we can't actually shut down the debate one way or the other. We can't say that all data everywhere should be made accessible. And we can't allow Dr. Ali Chaudhary to tap into our brains and make all of the data that all that we're thinking about to be made available on a portal or somewhere else.
That would be awesome.
That'd be awesome. But that's not going to happen. So we need to take a view on that. So not everything can be made into data. But then the argument for what can't be made into data has to be also based on reason. And it has to be legitimate.
Thank you, Arisab. I think it's a very interesting and important perspective on data, information, and democratization. So let me just come to my last panelist, and Dr. Sajid. And Dr. Sajid, thank you very much for your patience listening. So Dr. Sajid is the research fellow at Sustainable Development Policy Institute. And well, Dr. Sajid, you have been a great proponent of social angle for monetary policy and improving SBP communications. So we would like to hear from you that what we can do to improve this now that we have a unified data platform. So what are your views? And I would also appreciate if you could give us some concrete suggestions on this.
Thank you, Abid Sahab. You know, it's good to wait actually when there is an excellent discussion going on. One can take good notes. But you know, the end losing side is that all the good things to be said are already said. You don't have much to say exactly. And this is such a brilliant and excellent initiative from State Bank of Pakistan that I can see over the last 1 hour, Dr. Ahmed already busy on his laptop and waiting, writing a very long thread on data that you have provided. So this is really excellent initiative. And I assure Dr. Ali that the 2.5 years that have gone to this into this data will actually save tens of years. Thus people have been sort of wasting and finding a good quality data from multiple sources, many barriers. So this was really time worth investing. So really congratulations to the team, all from the governors, previous governors, Abid Saab, Ali, and all the team that has put in efforts into it. But two just quick points before on the discussion that has been so far before I just quickly answer your question. The one I think is the discussion and monetary policy in Pakistan unfortunately has been very technical and has more sort of clustered around very technical comments and the suggestions, sort of these things. For example, just one, I mean, bringing a different angle actually changes your tools, priorities, and money. But I'll give you just one example. I mean, let's see, to me, a data set is very important. But even more important is the dashboard, actually, depending on the purpose that you wanted to serve. I would like to see State Bank's dashboard actually first to go place for media on any issue on economy. And that requires a bit more dynamic dashboard. I mean, there should be, like Khurram very rightly said, that your interpretation is the trend actually, and the trend is what is your reference point. Trend changes with your reference point. So there are now sort of many easy kind of options, buttons, which allow you to set the start period and the end period at the dashboard actually. So you can give a freedom to the viewer. He or she has to just move to buttons like Data Mandi does, like many other does, and you have all the data in the background actually. So just one syntax that you have to link. So I would see that dashboard can be even become more dynamic, so that a public at large, which actually is the ultimate beneficiary of all this discussion that we are doing, that can go to the dashboard. Few of them will go to the data sets. More will end up at the dashboard, particularly if we have to promote the economic literacy or the monetary policy literacy. We should target a wider audience going beyond researchers. Generally, the discussion on monetary policy particularly is limited to researchers, academics. There is a very large audience of monetary policy which go beyond the researchers and the academics. And I think that angle needs to be bring in when there is a sort of updating of this dashboard. And we totally understand that this is a continuous process and it will take time really. But I just thought to bring this on. Another point that I think Khurram Saab highlighted was very important, but maybe from a different perspective from my side, that state bank should provide interpretations. I think this is a risky step. If by interpretation it means that providing definitions, the conceptual background of the variable that is there, how it is constructed, what is its definition, that is okay. But if it is to sort of provide interpretation that what this data is telling, I think this can be risky behavior, because in social sciences and particularly in economics, there are no white and sort of black interpretations. There are gray areas, and it is the context, it is the perspective you look at from. So I think the quality of data itself should drive to the right conclusions, which are contextual, but we should leave it to the user of the data that what interpretation does he or she bring, and definitely that will converge to a synthesis. You know, this is so these are the 2 points I thought to highlight before going into this one. I'll just on your quick proposals. I have just 5 quick proposals. Thanks that I have taken already the notes, so I'll be just covering it very quickly. The one is that the discussion, if I see it is to provide and to sort of a platform for the healthy debate on economy. But for that, I think one first step that State Bank of Pakistan, it has been already taking, but I think maybe a more priority focus, is to integrate monetary policy and central banking debate into the larger issues of the economy. Currently, there is a sort of disconnect if we see. I mean, I have already submitted it to State Bank in my multiple meetings that when I take a look on the last 20 years working papers published by State Bank, none of them has a word poverty and inequality in the title. So you cannot promote a healthy economy debate until and unless you integrate monetary policy and other central banking policies into the broader development agenda of the country and the pressing public policy issues like poverty, inequality. So my first recommendation, and I have already submitted this to bank, maybe the fear of repetition, those who have already met or listened on this one. The research agenda on State Bank of Pakistan needs to be expanded. It needs to go beyond current account deficit and impact of exchange rate on exports. While they are very important issues, but the ultimate beneficiaries of any policy, of any public policy, including monetary policy, are the people of Pakistan. And there needs to be sort of a cross-cutting intersection of the research that State Bank is doing. And there are the other issues that needs to be integrated, that needs to be synthesized. Not necessarily that in the first go you expand everything. I mean, there can be sort of a bulletin. I'm sure there must be already there there can be a section there which actually provides a non-technical summary of the key findings of the state bank's research and how they are linked to the pressing public policy and developmental issue of the country. That can be a starting point exactly. But keeping this one, I think one option, it may be later on, there are now central banks programs which are promoting developmental debates across the world. Can SBP think maybe going forward later on sometime, a program like Rasta? I mean, if Planning Commission is doing a program on Rasta, can State Bank use this platform, this data portal to expand and build a debate on development agenda of the country vis-a-vis monetary policy, vis-a-vis central banking? So this is my first sort of recommendation. The second recommendation, and that goes to back to multiple sort of speakers have highlighted, and I also see the slides when Dr. Syed Murtaza Saab was speaking, the 4 diagonals there. The one is the communication, I think. As we have said that there is a very sort of divorce, the kind of between the issues of monetary policy and how important this is actually for the development of any country. To me, I think monetary policy is even more important than the fiscal policy to promote a developmental agenda and development, bringing welfare and the well-being in any country. For that, I think the communication, sort of, let me be very blunt and very honest. We need a serious investment in communication capacity building at central bank, particularly in non-technical communication, which is communicating to the public at large. I met roughly maybe 150 people when I was writing paper. I visited to you as well. I'm very honored that meetings were chaired by Dr. Syed Murtaza Saab, and Ali Saab was also there. Many people think, I mean, many top experts, couple of ex-governors as well, that why you are talking monetary policy when you are talking inequality. I mean, that is the level that we have divorced this one. And that I think goes to the communication, because the communication of monetary policy was very technical and it needs to be a non-technical. And initially our proposal was, and I put it in SBP as well. And I hope that I can also remind that Dr. Syed Murtaza Saab also agreed on this one, that initially we may think of a 1-para non-technical summary in the monetary policy statement that is going on. Right now, there is a perception that MPS is written for newspaper editors and some people who are writing on monetary policy like me. I visited roughly 20 universities in this dissemination work. And I asked one question, that how many of you have read the last monetary policy statement? Not 1% hands were raised actually, including faculty. So I think this is how communication needs to be improved. And there are then multiple layers. This is good to see the podcast that is coming soon from State Bank of Pakistan. I think, and this goes to your question that you said that definitely we need to use the most modern updated technology that is available. But I think what will matter is the content. What content we are presenting there, in what language we are presenting that content there. And that depends on what is our target audience. And I think a fundamental shift is required. The target audience, a public at large, needs to be, and that is actually promote central bank's policies effectiveness, because currently there is no sort of monetary policy constituency or central banking constituency in Pakistan. Even when people are talking about inflation, they are talking about government, not State Bank of Pakistan, not monetary policy. So I think building a constituency for monetary policy and central banking through an easy to understand communication will increase the effectiveness and outreach of State Bank of Pakistan itself. I'll just close in 3 more minutes. Sorry, I have waited too long. And again, the second point on the slide was transparency. And I think this is very critical at this stage of point for State Bank of Pakistan when it is moving towards inflation targeting, because I think policy rate or interest rate will become a secondary tool actually, because it is more good in reactionary policy. But when you go on the preemptive policy, it is sort of altering the inflation expectations. And there the credibility of the central bank is very important. And that one of the key driver of raising that credibility, bringing higher credibility, is the transparency. And the 2 proposals that we have already submitted to State Bank, I'll just reiterate. to make it more, I mean, this is good to see. I mean, this data portal itself is being more transparent, more open. State Bank of Pakistan, and as Dr. Adil said, that this is first time that he is talking to, but this at the same time really speaks the kind of the gap of the communication of central bank with the outside of the State Bank of Pakistan. But this is good to see that it is coming. Within State Bank, I think at a decision-making forums, there is now a very good practice of publishing voting history. We have been reiterating, I will reiterate, that the starting point even can be the voting history of Monetary Policy Committee. Who voted for what? Who voted for raise? Who voted for not raise? I mean, our neighbor country, Reserve Bank of India, is doing the same actually. So this is, I think State Bank can itself think how can we, and just to take this benefit, I think we need a more representative decision-making forums at State Bank of Pakistan, be it Board of Governors or Board of Directors, what you call it, be it Monetary Policy Committee. We did an analysis. I think we have sent paper already. We could not find more than one female at any forum. It needs to be more representative. Similarly, and I think this takes me second criteria on transparency, that what is the criteria of selecting Monetary Policy Committee members? That needs to be public. It can be on the website. So this is how, and finally, I think a more formal and concentrated effort is needed on improving monetary policy literacy. We have discussed it very at length during our conversation with State Bank and other disseminations. Monetary policy is the least understood policy in Pakistan, actually. And there are very strong sort of, I mean, the Khurram Sahab was talking about that there are two layers. On the one is the data and other is the sort of poor conceptualization. But I think there are third as well, that is the confirmation biases. Due to the misinformation, due to the lack of understanding, there is very strong sort of confirmation biases against State Bank of Pakistan. And you see it coming when there was SBP Amendment Act 2021. I mean, the most literate people in decades of economics background, they were asking that this is disastrous to give independence to central bank. This is not about misconception. This is about the confirmation biases that are there due to, and that I think will require a very improved communication and literacy programs. And state SDPI is undertaking 2 days workshop in July. We have already discussed with State Bank that we will be providing that content and other things that definitely can be improved to scale it up and how it can be. And final, just closing 1 minute, that is that a more wider level of sort of collaborations and partnerships are required. I think the agenda of monetary policy, particularly post-COVID, has widened so much. And you see that just updating data portal will require a separate division. You can't do it without part-time job. State Bank has to have a separate data portal division even. That is the level of effort required. So communicating to public at large and many other things. So I think a very systematic collaboration between development partners, between State Bank of Pakistan, between policy think tanks. Let me bring in my sector as well, is required. And I think what is missing in this whole picture that has been discussed so far is in terms of collaboration and partnerships. But thankfully, Dr. Sayyid Mustafa Sahab highlighted that is taking on board those who are the most fit for those jobs. Take the advantage, comparative advantage as a criteria of engaging. If it is to communicate to the public at large, who has a comparative advantage in translating very technical messages to the non-technical messages. So I think these are quick sort of recommendations or suggestions. I mean, instead of recommendation submissions, actually you can call it. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Sajid. I requested you for concrete suggestions, but you have given not only concrete but very comprehensive suggestions. so we will try to implement those suggestions. So this concludes our second part of our program. So
Can I just issue one small point of clarification?
sure.
Matter?
Yeah.
But my point was never okay, the state bank should interpret the data. My point is that the state bank already does that. In the quarterly reports, the state of the economy report, that's what they do. In the annual report, the state of the economy annual report, that's what they do. They're actually providing interpretations and analysis of the data and the direction in which the economy is going. And my point in bringing that up, I think got a bit, may not have gotten across clearly, is that the state bank must exercise its mandate as an autonomous body to the hilt and provide this very contested picture of where the economy is going, as an autonomous body and deflect political pressure to the absolutely maximum extent. And that is something that is absolutely critically important, that we have a voice such as that, a voice that has official credibility and at the same time is the curator of the data, and at the same time is providing the public directly with an analysis and interpretation of where the economy is going. That presence is going to do a lot to stabilize the discourse in this country.
Thank you.
That
Thank you, Karam, for.
Sorry, I think I misunderstood in a different context. That I agree with, definitely. And even in that, I think there can be even monthly inflation city-wise bulletin that used to come can also be reinitiated. I'm on with you on this. Thank you,
Dr. Sajid. So I wish we had more time, but unfortunately we don't have. So we have to close the program now. So, but before closing, I would request Governor Dr. Syed to say some concluding remarks.
Thank you very much, Abid. Let me first again thank our panelists for joining us today, and I think a very rich discussion. And this was supposed to be a 1 hour session. It's almost 2 hours now. So really just shows you that once you start to talk about these things, you can go on for a long time. But really want to thank everyone, learned a lot, taken a lot of notes, and just will maybe summarize in a minute or so my main takeaways. I think Khurram Hussain Saab made a lot of good suggestions in terms of how we can improve the program, as well as how to marry the data with this conceptual rigor point. I think your point is very well taken, Khurram, that we have a very sacred duty that we are undertaking here through our quarterly reports, through the market policy statements, and we should use that very, very responsibly. And I think I've taken those notes. I think Dr. Ali Hasnan made a good point about needing to engage with TikTok. We're finding it hard enough to engage with Twitter and Facebook, but I think TikTok is indeed the next frontier. And in fact, I know that the Bank of Indonesia, for example, does do that and does it very successfully. So your suggestion is also very well taken there. Dr. Ahmed Pirzada, I think this suggestion of having a blog section associated with our portal that will allow our staff to also air their own analysis and also allow people to see how this data can be used, I think is an excellent one. We are planning to do a blog, but I think maybe having some part of it be linked directly to the Easy Data portal, I think is a fantastic idea and something that I would encourage Abid Saab to think a little bit about. Azam Chaudhry, I think, made some very good points about how data drives expectations. And I think this machine learning and big data point is a very, very deep one, and something that Dr. Ali has been pushing me to consider more systematically for a long time. We've been talking to other central banks as well about how they do this. And we think that our statistics department in particular needs to be modernized, and perhaps some part of it needs to be taken into that direction. And that's something that Dr. Ali and I hopefully will get a chance to do more of going forward. My old friend Adil, who I think has dropped off again, is a very busy man. We used to work together for Dr. Mahbubul Haq in the late 1990s, as I said in the beginning. And he is, has really matured into a fantastic economist. I think he made a very good point about the need for an integrated data platform. So we can try and bring more and more data into Easy Data. It doesn't have to be just monetary data or exchange rate data, the kind of data that we usually deal with. We can also bring in more data sets, including from Nagra, where in fact Abil's brother works as well, Tariq Malik's brother. Dr. Asma, I think you made some very good points also about the need to integrate firm level data into the portal. We'll see how much of that can be done. Dr. Ali, a lot of his research actually is to do with micro level data, so we will see what more we can bring in, and I think we will hopefully be pleasantly surprised as we go along this journey. This is today just the first step. Of course, we are going to continually improve the portal. Maha Rahman made, I think, some very, very good points, but maybe one that just caught my eye was the importance of contextualizing the data, because once you publicize data, as you said, data can become political, and it's very important to be very responsible in the way that you are communicating what that data means and what it doesn't mean, to borrow a term I think the firm used as well. Haris, it's really good to see you after all these years, and I think you made some very deep points about the link between democracy and data and the post-fact society, and the fact that it's our collective responsibility really to be very careful in how we use data, and how Dr. Ali's wish that all our thoughts could be digitized and converted into data would actually be quite a dangerous future as well. But I think that's good. And Dr. Sajid always makes very, very good points. He has made these points to us before bilaterally as well about the need, I think, to communicate monetary policy better and to have non-technical discussions of the implications of monetary policy. Is a very, very important point. Something that, again, I've taken note of. Let me just end then, maybe just give me 1 minute to try to bring everything together. Why did we do this today? I think today we wanted to unveil this data set that we've been working on for a long time. We thought it was ready now finally for prime time. It may still have some glitches. It's a work in progress. It'll continue to evolve. We'll have more data added. Today we got some very, very good feedback, and we'll continue, I hope, to take this in that direction. So work with us, keep telling us what you need, and we are committed to making that data available to you. I also would like to say that, look, it's our collective responsibility. The State Bank, some people have said some very good things about the State Bank, which I, not just because I work here, but I actually believe the State Bank is, in a very privileged position compared to other public institutions in Pakistan. We don't wear that hat lightly. We are very careful in how we communicate. But we also need to modernize. And you will see going forward that we will try to do more and more communication. We want to do more events like these where we bring academia, think tanks, other members of the public together. And I'm really glad that today we brought such a diverse group, including people outside Pakistan who were kind enough to join us. And maybe I can leave you with one thought. These days I'm reading a book called The Influential Mind, which is written by a neuroscientist. And in some ways it's depressing, but in other ways it's also enlightening. Depressing in the following sense, that it claims that actually people are not that convinced by data, ultimately. You have certain biases, you like certain data, you don't like other data, you use it to tell stories. But the enlightening part is that you can bring people around to your point of view by telling stories. Stories are the most important way that you can persuade people. You use the data, try to understand where that person is coming from, and then convert it into stories. And I think narrative economics, for example, is something that has really become very famous. Robert Schiller has been writing about it. So these stories that we tell one another about how the economy works, about where Pakistan stands in the legion of countries, are very important. They help set expectations, and they also chart a path for the future. So I would like to request all of you, we will reach out to you after this as well. Help us, maybe we can set up a little committee or a body, an advisory body. Help us communicate better. Give us your thoughts. We are all in this together. It's a public good that we are trying to do. We're trying to move the country forward, and it cannot happen just with the State Bank acting on its own. So we really want to open ourselves up to you, to get your feedback, and to be able to do justice to a country that ultimately is 220 million people, the fifth largest country in the world, and is punching seriously below its weight. So we really need to, I think, all collectively try to turn things around as far as rational discourse is concerned in this country. That's it.
Thank you, Gamal Saab. So before concluding, I would like to say thanks to all the panel members for sparing time for us, and we'll be looking forward to meet you in future as well. So thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Goodbye from our side.
Thank you, everyone. Khuda Hafiz.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Allah Hafiz.
Allah Hafiz. Thank you so much.